She was having lunch at a quiet cafe when a bully snatched her purse and shoved her to the ground. The cafe went silent. No one moved to help. Then the door opened, and her biker son walked in. What the bully didn't know, her son had been hunting him for months. The salt air drifted through the open windows of the Harborview Cafe, mixing with the smell of fresh coffee and grilled fish. Sandra Miller sat alone at a corner table, her silver hair catching the afternoon sunlight as she gazed out at the ocean. At 68, she'd learned to appreciate moments like these, quiet, peaceful, hers. She'd been driving along the coast for 3 hours, heading to her sister Marla's place in Clearwater. The cafe was supposed to be a quick stop. Stretch her legs. Use the restroom. Maybe grab a sandwich for the road. She should have kept driving. Sandra set her brown leather purse on the empty chair beside her and picked up the menu. The lunch crowd had thinned out, leaving only a handful of customers scattered across the small dining room. A young couple by the window. An older man reading a newspaper near the counter. A waitress wiping down tables in the back. And then there was the group near the door. 4 men, mid-20s, loud and restless. They wore leather vests covered in patches, wolves, skulls, words Sandra couldn't quite read from her seat. Bikers, she assumed, though not the kind she'd grown used to seeing around Jake. These ones had mean eyes and sneering mouths. The kind of men who looked for trouble because boredom scared them more than consequences. One of them, tall, broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, kept glancing her way. His buddies laughed at something he said, but Sandra couldn't hear the joke. She didn't want to. She looked back at her menu, keeping her head down. "Excuse me, ma'am." Sandra glanced up. The scarred man stood beside her table now, grinning like a wolf that had cornered something small. Up close, his vest had a name stitched across it, Rick. "Yes?" Sandra kept her voice polite but firm. Rick pointed at her purse. "Nice bag. Looks expensive." "It's not." Sandra's hand moved instinctively toward it. "Nah, I think it is." Rick reached down and grabbed the purse before Sandra could react. "Let's see what you got in here, Grandma." "Give that back." Sandra stood, her chair scraping against the floor. The cafe went silent. Every head turned. Rick dangled the purse just out of reach, laughing. "What's the magic word?" "I said give it back." Sandra lunged for it, but Rick jerked it away. His friends erupted in laughter from their table. "Feisty old bird, ain't she?" Rick said over his shoulder. Then he looked back at Sandra, his grin fading into something colder. "Sit down, lady. Before you fall and break a hip." "That's my property." Sandra's voice shook, not with fear, but with anger. She'd buried a husband, raised a son, and survived 68 years on this earth. She wasn't about to let some punk in a leather vest humiliate her in front of strangers. She reached for the purse again. Rick's hand shot out and shoved her, hard. Sandra stumbled backward, catching herself against the table. Pain flared in her shoulder where his palm had connected. The cafe gasped collectively, but no one moved. The young couple looked away. The old man folded his newspaper. The waitress froze mid-step. Rick tossed the purse onto Sandra's table with a snort. "There. Happy now?" He turned toward his friends, already laughing about something else. Sandra pressed a hand to her shoulder, breathing hard. Her eyes stung, but she refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of him. The cafe door swung open. The bell above it chimed, a bright, cheerful sound that didn't match the moment at all. Heavy boots hit the floor. 1 step. 2. 3. Sandra looked up. So did Rick. The man in the doorway was tall, 6'2", maybe more, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and a thick beard covering his jaw. He wore a black leather jacket over a faded gray t-shirt, jeans torn at the knees, and scuffed motorcycle boots. His arms were covered in tattoos that disappeared beneath his sleeves. A pair of sunglasses hung from his shirt collar. He looked like trouble. But Sandra knew better. "Jake?" Her voice came out small, surprised. Jake Miller stood in the doorway, his ice-blue eyes scanning the room. They landed on his mother first, standing by the table, one hand on her shoulder, face flushed. Then they shifted to Rick, still smirking near the door. Then to Rick's friends, watching with sudden interest. Jake's jaw tightened. "Mom," he crossed the cafe in 4 long strides, positioning himself between Sandra and Rick without looking at the other man. His hands were gentle when they touched her arms. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Sandra tried to sound steady, but her voice cracked. "What are you doing here?" "Surprise visit." Jake's eyes never left Rick, even as he spoke to his mother. "Thought I'd catch you on the road. Guess I got lucky." Rick snorted. "Oh, great. Another biker loser." He looked Jake up and down, unimpressed. "This your boyfriend, Grandma?" "That's my son," Sandra said quietly. Jake's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air around him. He turned slowly to face Rick, his posture relaxed but ready. When he spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm. "You put your hands on my mother." Rick grinned. "She got mouthy. I corrected her." "You hit her." "I pushed her." "There's a difference." Jake took one step forward. Rick's friends tensed, hands moving toward their belts. The cafe held its breath. And then Jake smiled, cold and empty. "Walk away," Jake said softly. "Right now. Before this gets worse for you." Rick laughed. "You threatening me?" "I'm giving you a choice." For a moment, Rick seemed to consider it. His eyes flicked to Jake's jacket, searching for patches, for club colors, for anything that would tell him who he was dealing with. But Jake's jacket was blank. No affiliations. No warnings. Rick decided that made Jake nobody. "You know what?" Rick stepped closer, his breath hot and sour. "I think I'm gonna take your mom's purse again. Just for fun. And if you got a problem with that." Jake moved. Not a punch. Not yet. Just a shift, his left foot sliding forward, his weight redistributing, his hands rising to a position that looked casual but wasn't. Rick's friends stood up from their table, and suddenly the cafe wasn't quiet anymore. Chairs scraped. Someone gasped. The waitress grabbed the phone. And Sandra whispered, "Jake, don't." Jake froze. His eyes stayed locked on Rick, but his mother's voice cut through everything else. Rick saw the hesitation and mistook it for weakness. He spat on the floor near Jake's boots. "That's what I thought." He backed toward the door, his friends following. "Enjoy your meal, Grandma. Next time, keep your mouth shut." They left in a chorus of laughter and slamming doors. The cafe exhaled. Jake turned to his mother, his face unreadable. "Come on. We're leaving." "Jake." "Now, Mom." Sandra grabbed her purse and followed her son outside, her heart pounding, her mind racing with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Because that look in Jake's eyes, the one he'd given Rick, wasn't the look of a man walking away from a fight. It was the look of a man planning something much worse. The ocean breeze hit Sandra's face as Jake guided her out of the cafe, his hand firm but gentle on her elbow. The parking lot stretched before them, a dozen cars scattered across faded white lines, and beyond that, the gray-blue expanse of the Atlantic. Rick and his crew hadn't left. They stood beside 2 motorcycles near the lot's edge, smoking cigarettes and passing around a flask. When Rick saw Jake emerge, he nudged his friends and grinned. "Jake, let's just go," Sandra whispered, tugging at her son's arm. Jake didn't answer. He walked Sandra to her silver Honda Civic and opened the door. "Get in. Lock the doors. What are you going to do?" "Talk." Jake's voice was flat, controlled. "Just talk." Sandra knew that tone. She'd heard it before, years ago, when Jake was 17 and a neighborhood kid had slashed the tires on her car. Jake had talked to him too. The kid never came near their house again. "Jake. Lock the doors, Mom." Sandra climbed into the driver's seat, her hands shaking as she hit the lock button. Through the window, she watched her son walk toward the bikers with long, purposeful strides. His hands stayed loose at his sides, but everything about his posture screamed danger. Rick saw him coming and laughed. "You just don't learn, do you?" Jake stopped 10 feet away, close enough to talk but far enough to react if things went sideways. His eyes swept over the group, counting, cataloging, analyzing. 4 men total. Rick in front. 2 flanking him, one short and stocky with a spider web tattoo on his neck, the other rail-thin with nervous hands. The 4th hung back, older than the rest, watching Jake with calculating eyes. That one was smart. That one was trouble. "We got a problem." Rick took a drag from his cigarette, tilting his head. "Or you finally figured out you're outmatched?" "No problem," Jake said calmly. "Just wanted to get a good look at you boys. You know. In case we meet again." Rick's grin faltered. "That a threat?" An observation. Jake's eyes dropped to Rick's vest, studying the patches. A wolf's head with red eyes. The words, "Iron Tide MC," across the top. "Grayport," on the bottom rocker. And on the front, near Rick's shoulder, a single patch that made Jake's blood run cold. A silver key crossed with a skull. That patch wasn't standard club insignia. Jake had seen it before, 3 months ago, in a briefing room 200 miles north. It marked members involved in the club's smuggling operation, the same operation Jake had spent 12 weeks infiltrating. Rick was connected. Not just a bully. A player. Jake filed that information away and kept his face neutral. "You done staring?" Rick flicked his cigarette toward Jake's boots. "Or you want a picture?" "I'm good." Jake shifted his weight slightly, positioning himself between the bikers and his mother's car. "Just making sure I remember your face. In case you decide to bother my mother again." The short one with the spider web tattoo laughed. "Oh, we'll remember her. Old ladies make easy marks." Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Not yet. Blowing his cover over a parking lot brawl wasn't an option, not when he was this close to cracking the entire smuggling ring wide open. Agent Torres would kill him. The task force would lose months of work. And Rick and his crew would scatter before anyone could roll them up. But God, Jake wanted to hit him. "You got something to say, biker?" Rick stepped closer, emboldened by Jake's silence. "Or you just gonna stand there looking tough?" Jake met his eyes. "I'm saying my piece. Stay away from my mother. Stay away from me. We're done here. We're done when I say we're done." Rick poked Jake's chest with one thick finger. "You walked into my town. You disrespected me in front of my brothers. That's got consequences." Jake looked down at the finger, then back up at Rick. When he spoke, his voice dropped to something soft and deadly. "Touch me again, and you'll find out what consequences really look like." Rick hesitated. Just for a second. Something in Jake's eyes made him reconsider, some flicker of violence that promised pain, not posturing. But Rick was proud and stupid, so he puffed his chest out and tried to save face. "Whatever, man. You ain't worth the trouble." He backed toward his motorcycle, gesturing to his crew. "Let's roll. This place stinks anyway." The 4 bikers mounted their bikes, 2 Harleys, loud and chrome-heavy. Rick kicked his engine to life with a roar, revving it twice. He leaned over the handlebars and shouted over the noise. "Hey, tough guy. You might want to check on Grandma. She looked pretty shaky back there. Hate for something to happen to her while you're playing hero." Jake's hands curled into fists, but he stayed still. Rick laughed and peeled out of the parking lot, his crew following. The sound of their engines faded down the coastal road, leaving only the crash of waves and the cry of seagulls. Jake stood there for a long moment, breathing slowly, forcing the adrenaline down. Then he pulled out his phone and snapped a photo of the tire tracks in the gravel, clear tread patterns, distinct enough to match later. He walked back to his mother's car and tapped on the window. Sandra unlocked the door, her face pale. "Jake, what just happened?" Jake crouched beside the car, his voice low and urgent. "Mom, I need you to listen very carefully. Those men aren't just bikers. They're part of something bigger. Something dangerous." "What are you talking about?" Jake glanced over his shoulder, making sure the lot was empty. Then he looked back at his mother, and for the first time in years, she saw fear in his eyes. "I'm undercover, Mom. Have been for 3 months. And that guy Rick? He just became my #1 target." Sandra stared at her son like he'd just spoken a foreign language. "Undercover? Jake, what are you? You're a motorcycle mechanic. You work at Danny's shop in." "That's my cover." Jake glanced around the parking lot again, his eyes never stopping, always scanning. "Mom, not here. Let's walk." He helped her out of the car, and they moved toward the boardwalk that stretched along the beach. The wooden planks creaked under their feet as they walked past closed tourist shops and empty benches. The afternoon sun hung low over the water, painting everything in shades of gold and orange. Sandra's mind raced. Her son, her Jake, who called every Sunday and complained about carburetor problems, was undercover? "How long have you been lying to me?" "I wasn't lying. I was protecting you." Jake kept his voice low, his hand hovering near her elbow as they walked. "The less you knew, the safer you were." "Safe from what?" Jake stopped at the boardwalk railing and leaned against it, facing the ocean. For a moment, he looked tired, bone-deep tired, the kind that came from carrying secrets too heavy to share. 3 months ago, I got recruited by a multi-state task force," he began, his voice barely audible over the waves. "ATF, FBI, state police, all working together to take down a smuggling ring operating across the East Coast. Stolen goods, mostly. Electronics, jewelry, pharmaceuticals. High-value items that disappear from warehouses and stores, then get fenced overseas." Sandra's hand went to her throat. "And you're... what? Pretending to be one of them?" "I'm a prospect for a motorcycle club called the Jackals. Small outfit, based in Delaware. They've got connections to bigger clubs, including the Iron Tide, which is what Rick and his crew belong to." Jake turned to face her, his expression serious. "The Jackals have been helping move stolen merchandise for months. I've been gaining their trust, gathering evidence, documenting everything. We're this close to rolling up the entire operation." Sandra felt dizzy. She gripped the railing for support. "Jake, you could get killed. I'm careful. That man hit me. What if he recognizes you? What if..." Her voice cracked, and suddenly she was crying, tears streaming down her face. "You should have told me." Jake moved closer, wrapping his arms around her. She buried her face in his chest, and for a moment, he was just her son again, not an undercover operative, not a man playing dangerous games with dangerous people. Just Jake. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered into her hair. "I wanted to tell you. But the fewer people who know, the better. Even Torres, my handler, only contacts me through burner phones. No digital trail. No paper trail. Nothing that could expose me if things go wrong. Sandra pulled back, wiping her eyes. And now I've dragged you into whatever this is. That Rick person saw you with me. He knows you're my son. Yeah, Jake's jaw tightened. That's a problem. What kind of problem? Jake was quiet for a moment, weighing his words. The Iron Tide operates out of Greyport, this town. They're small-time compared to other clubs, but they're connected to the people I've been tracking. That patch Rick was wearing? The silver key with the skull? That's not standard club insignia. It marks him as part of the smuggling crew. Sandra's eyes widened. So when he hit me, you weren't just protecting your mother. You were protecting your case. Don't say it like that, Jake's voice turned sharp. You're my mother. The case doesn't matter if you're in danger. Then why didn't you fight him? Back in the cafe, you looked ready to tear him apart, but you stopped. Sandra searched her son's face. Why? Jake looked away, his hands gripping the railing. Because if I'd hit him, really hit him, it would have raised questions. Bikers don't fight like I fight. I've had training. Years of it. If Rick had seen that, he would have known something was off. And if he'd started asking questions, Jake trailed off, shaking his head. The whole operation could have collapsed. Months of work, gone. And the people running this smuggling ring? They'd disappear before we could touch them. Sandra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. So you let him walk away. I let him think he won, Jake corrected. There's a difference. I got what I needed, confirmation that he's connected, a look at his crew, photos of their bikes. And now I know they operate in this area, which means they're probably involved in the pickup that's happening soon. Pickup? Jake hesitated, then sighed. There's a shipment coming through in the next few days. Stolen electronics from a warehouse job up in Massachusetts. The task force has been waiting for this. It's the biggest movement of goods we've tracked so far. If we can intercept it, we can trace it back to the main distributors. And Rick is involved? If he's wearing that patch, he's more than involved. He's probably helping coordinate it. Jake turned back to his mother, his expression softening. But right now, that's not my priority. You are. Sandra shook her head. Jake, you can't blow your cover because of me. If this is important, you're more important. Don't be stupid. Sandra grabbed his arm, her voice firm despite the fear coursing through her. You've spent 3 months on this. You said people could get away if you stop now. Well, I won't be the reason that happens. Jake studied her face, the determination in her eyes, the set of her jaw. She looked like she had when he was 12 and she'd marched into the principal's office to defend him after a fight. Fierce. Unshakable. Mom. No, Sandra squared her shoulders. You finish this. You catch these people. But you do it smart, understand? No heroics. No getting yourself killed trying to protect me. Jake smiled despite himself. When did you get so tough? I raised you, didn't I? Sandra managed a weak smile. Now, what's our next move? Jake pulled out his phone, one of 3 he carried, and checked the time. First, I'm getting you somewhere safe. The Ocean View Motel looked nothing like its name suggested. The 2-story building sagged slightly to the left, its blue paint peeling in long strips that curled in the salt air. Half the neon sign buzzed and flickered, turning vacancy into V_C_NCY, but it was cheap, anonymous, and most importantly, it took cash. Jake pulled his motorcycle into the lot beside Sandra's Honda. She'd followed him the 3 miles from the boardwalk, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles had gone white. This place looks like it has bedbugs, Sandra said as she stepped out of her car. It probably does. Jake swung his leg off the bike and grabbed his duffel bag from the back. But nobody's going to look for you here. That's what matters. The front desk clerk barely looked up when Jake paid for the room, ground floor, far corner, away from the road. He signed the register as John Davis and declined the offer of fresh towels. 5 minutes later, Sandra was standing in a room that smelled like stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. Jake, this is ridiculous. I can just drive to Marla's house. It's only 40 minutes. Not until I know it's safe. Jake checked the locks on the door and windows, testing them twice. Rick knows what your car looks like. If anyone from the Iron Tide spots it on the road, they could follow you. And I'm not putting Aunt Marla in danger. Sandra sat on the edge of the bed, which groaned under her weight. So what? I just hide here while you do whatever it is you're going to do. I need to make some calls. Check in with Torres, let him know the situation's changed. Jake set his duffel on the small table and unzipped it. Inside, Sandra caught a glimpse of things that made her stomach turn: a gun, zip ties, what looked like a police radio. And I need to figure out if Rick's going to be a problem. He already is a problem. A bigger problem, Jake clarified. He pulled out one of his phones, not the smartphone, but an old flip phone with scratches across its screen. Stay here. Keep the door locked. I'm going to grab some ice and make a call outside. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Jake. But he was already gone, the door clicking shut behind him. Sandra sat in the silence, her heart pounding. The room's air conditioner rattled and wheezed, pumping out lukewarm air that did nothing to cool her nerves. She thought about calling Marla, but what would she say? Hi, sister. I got assaulted by a biker, and it turns out Jake's been living a lie for 3 months. How's your Tuesday? Outside, footsteps crunched on gravel. Sandra stood and moved to the window, peeking through the stained curtains. Jake stood near the ice machine, phone pressed to his ear, his back to the motel. He was talking, she could see his jaw moving, but she couldn't hear the words. Then she saw them. 2 motorcycles rolled into the parking lot, engines rumbling low and menacing. The riders wore leather vests. Iron Tide patches. Sandra's breath caught. They weren't Rick, these men were different. One was massive, easily 6'4", with a gray beard that reached his chest. The other was younger, lean and wiry, with sleeve tattoos that covered both arms. And they were looking right at Jake. Jake noticed them immediately. He ended his call without saying goodbye and slipped the phone into his pocket. His posture shifted, shoulders back, weight balanced. Ready. The 2 bikers parked their motorcycles and climbed off. The big one approached first, his boots heavy on the gravel. The younger one flanked him, hands in his pockets. Sandra pressed her face closer to the window, her heart hammering. You lost? The big one asked Jake, his voice carrying across the lot. Jake shook his head. Just getting ice. Funny. 'Cause we heard there was some asshole at the Harborview Cafe earlier. Guy who thought he could disrespect one of our brothers. The big one stepped closer, invading Jake's space. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Jake held his ground. Depends. Which brother? Rick, the younger one, circled around Jake's left side, boxing him in. Big guy. Shaved head. Said some biker and his old lady got mouthy with him. Rick's got a bad memory, Jake said calmly. It was the other way around. The big one grinned, showing teeth stained yellow from tobacco. See, that's not how Rick tells it. And in this town, Rick's word means something. Yours? Not so much. Jake glanced at the younger biker, then back at the big one. So what? You boys here to deliver a message? Something like that. The big one cracked his knuckles. Stay out of club business. Stay out of our town. And if we see you or that old lady again, things are gonna get real uncomfortable. We clear? Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, that same cold, empty smile he'd given Rick at the cafe. Crystal. But his hand moved to his pocket, pulling out his phone. Not the flip phone. The smartphone. And he held it at an angle, camera facing the two bikers. The younger one noticed. "What are you doing?" "Making sure I remember your faces," Jake said. "You know. In case we meet again." The big one's grin faded. "You recording us?" "Just taking pictures." Jake snapped 2 quick photos, then pocketed the phone. "For my collection." The younger biker lunged forward, but the big one grabbed his arm. "Don't. Not worth it." "But he." "I said don't." The big one pulled the younger man back, his eyes never leaving Jake. "You're making a mistake, friend. Playing games you don't understand." "Maybe," Jake said. "Or maybe you're the ones who don't understand." The two bikers stared at him for another long moment. Then, without another word, they mounted their motorcycles and roared out of the parking lot. Jake stood there, watching them disappear down the coastal road. Then he pulled out the flip phone again and dialed. "Torres," he said when the call connected. "We've got a problem. They know about my mother. And they just confirmed something big. There's a pickup tonight." Inside the motel room, Sandra pressed her hand against the window, tears streaming down her face. Her son was in deeper than she'd realized. And there was no way out but through. Jake paced the motel parking lot, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and urgent. "They approached me directly, Torres. 2 Iron Tide members. They knew about the cafe incident." Agent Maria Torres's voice crackled through the burner phone, tense and clipped. "Did they make you?" "No. But they're watching. And they mentioned a pickup tonight, tried to warn me off club business." Jake paused by his motorcycle, his free hand drumming against the seat. "They wouldn't have said that unless something significant was happening." "Hold on," Jake heard typing in the background, then Torres muttering to herself. "Okay, we've been monitoring chatter from our wiretaps. There's been increased communication between the Iron Tide and a crew operating out of Clearwater. That's the next town north of you, about 25 miles. "What kind of communication?" "Coded, mostly. But our analyst flagged several references to the package and Wednesday night, that's tonight." Jake, more typing. "We think it's the Massachusetts job, 300,000 in stolen electronics from a warehouse hit last week. High-end laptops, tablets, camera equipment. The kind of merchandise that moves fast overseas." Jake's jaw tightened. "Where's the pickup?" "That's the problem. We don't have a location yet. Just that it's happening in Clearwater, somewhere near the water." Torres paused. "Jake, if the Iron Tide is involved, and if Rick's part of this crew, we need eyes on the ground. But given what happened today, I can do it." "Can you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, you've got a compromised position. They know your face. They know your mother. If they connect you to law enforcement, they won't." Jake glanced back at the motel room where Sandra waited. "I kept my cover. Played it like a concerned son protecting his mother. Nothing about my behavior screamed cop. Except the part where you didn't fight back," Torres said. "Bikers don't walk away from disrespect, Jake. You know that. If Rick's smart, and according to his file, he's smarter than he looks, he's going to wonder why you showed restraint." Jake knew she was right. He'd been thinking the same thing since the parking lot confrontation. "So what do you want me to do? Pull out? Let 3 months of work circle the drain?" Torres was quiet for a long moment. Then she sighed. "No. We're too close. But we need to be smart about this. Where's your mother now?" "Motel room. Safe. For now. Keep her there. I'm sending backup to Clearwater, 2 agents in an unmarked car." They'll handle surveillance on the Iron Tide Clubhouse and known associates. You focus on the jackals. Act like nothing's changed. If Rick or his crew contact you, play dumb. You're just a guy who defended his mother. And if they don't buy it? Then you abort and we'll pick up the pieces. Torres's voice softened slightly. Jake, I know this got personal today. But you can't let that cloud your judgment. The mission comes first. Always. Jake closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those words. The mission. 3 months of living a lie, of playing poker with criminals, of watching illegal shipments move through warehouses while he documented everything for court. 3 months of staying in character, even when he wanted to bust heads and slap cuffs on wrists. And now his mother was caught in the middle of it. Jake? You still there? Yeah, Jake opened his eyes. I'm here. Send me whatever intel you get on the Clearwater location. I'll shadow the jackals tonight, see if they lead me to the pickup. Negative. You stay with your mother. That's an order. Torres. I said no. Her voice turned sharp. You're too exposed right now. The last thing we need is you showing up at a smuggling operation with Iron Tide members present. They're already suspicious. Don't give them a reason to dig deeper. Jake bit back his frustration. So I just sit here? You protect your mother and stay out of sight. Let my team handle the surveillance. If we get actionable intel, I'll loop you in. Until then, you're benched. Torres paused. I mean it, Jake. Don't do anything stupid. The line went dead. Jake stood in the parking lot, the phone hot against his palm. The sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. In the distance, waves crashed against the shore, steady and relentless. He looked down at the smartphone in his other pocket, the one with the photos of the 2 bikers who'd confronted him. The big one with the gray beard. The younger one with the sleeve tattoos. Neither had been wearing the silver key patch that Rick wore, which meant they were muscle, not smugglers. Enforcers sent to deliver a message. But why send them at all? Rick could have let it go. The cafe incident was over. Sandra and Jake were leaving town. There was no reason to escalate. Unless Rick was worried. Unless he'd seen something in Jake that didn't add up. Jake pulled up the photos again, zooming in on the patches. The gray-bearded one had a road captain rocker beneath his Iron Tide patch, a senior member, someone with authority. And on his vest, partially visible beneath his arm, was another patch. Small, easy to miss. The silver key with the skull. Jake's blood ran cold. They weren't just muscle. They were part of the smuggling crew. And if they'd been sent to warn Jake off, it meant Rick had flagged him as a potential problem. Which meant Jake's cover was thinner than he'd thought. He pulled out the flip phone and dialed again. Torres answered on the first ring. What now? Change of plans, Jake said. The 2 guys who approached me, they're not just enforcers. They're wearing the key patch. Both of them. Torres swore under her breath. You're sure? Positive. I've got photos. Send them. Encrypted channel. Torres was typing again, faster now. If they're involved, that changes things. The Iron Tide might be running point on this pickup, not just assisting. Which means it's bigger than we thought. Yeah, Torres exhaled slowly. Okay. New plan. Get your mother out of Grayport tonight. Drive her to her sister's place in Clearwater. That's where the pickup is happening. I know. But it's also a bigger town with more places to hide. And I need you closer to the action, just in case. Torres paused. But Jake? Your priority is still your mother. You keep her safe first. The case second. Understood? Jake looked back at the motel room, where Sandra waited in the dark. Understood. Good. Now move. We've got 6 hours until nightfall, and I need you in position before this thing goes sideways. Jake ended the call and headed back to the room. Time to tell his mother they were going back on the road. Dawn broke over Clearwater in shades of pink and gold, painting the quiet residential streets with soft light. Sandra sat in the passenger seat of her Honda, her overnight bag clutched in her lap, watching the houses roll by. She hadn't slept. Every time she'd closed her eyes in that terrible motel room, she'd seen Rick's face, felt his hand shoving her backward. Jake rode ahead on his motorcycle, his leather jacket catching the morning sun. He'd insisted on leaving Grayport at 4 in the morning, while the town still slept. Safer that way, he'd said. Less chance of being spotted. Now, 2 hours later, they pulled into the driveway of a modest blue Cape Cod with white shutters and a garden bursting with autumn flowers. Marla's house. The front door flew open before Sandra could even unbuckle her seatbelt. Sandy. Marla rushed down the porch steps, her gray hair still in curlers, bathrobe flapping behind her. At 72, she moved with the energy of a woman half her age. What on earth are you doing here at 6 in the morning? I thought you weren't coming until this afternoon. Sandra climbed out of the car and found herself wrapped in her sister's embrace. For a moment, she let herself feel safe. Change of plans, Sandra managed, her voice thick. Marla pulled back, studying her sister's face. Then she looked past Sandra to Jake, who was securing his motorcycle. Her expression shifted from confusion to concern. Jake? What's going on? Jake walked over, pulling off his riding gloves. Morning, Aunt Marla. Sorry to drop in early. There was an incident yesterday. Mom's fine, but I thought it'd be safer if she stayed with you for a few days. Incident? Marla's eyes narrowed. What kind of incident? The kind where some punk hit your sister, Jake said flatly. Marla's face went white, then red. Someone hit you? She grabbed Sandra's shoulders, looking her over. Where? Are you hurt? Did you call the police? I'm fine, Marla. Really, Sandra tried to smile, but it came out shaky. Just shaken up. Jake handled it. Handled it how? Marla looked at her nephew with a mix of pride and worry. Jake, you didn't. I didn't do anything I shouldn't have. Jake picked up Sandra's overnight bag from the car. But the situation's complicated. Can we talk inside? Marla hesitated, then nodded. Of course. Come on. I'll make coffee. The inside of Marla's house smelled like cinnamon and old books. She'd lived here for 40 years, raised 3 kids in these rooms, buried a husband, and built a life that felt solid and permanent. Everything Sandra's life hadn't been since her husband died 5 years ago. They settled around the kitchen table, steaming mugs of coffee in hand. Through the window, Sandra could see the neighbor's cat stalking through the garden. So, Marla said, her hands wrapped around her mug. Tell me everything. Jake exchanged a glance with Sandra. She nodded. He'd already told her the truth. Might as well tell Marla too. I'm working undercover, Jake began. Have been for 3 months. I'm part of a task force investigating a smuggling ring that operates along the coast. Yesterday, Mom had a run-in with one of the people I've been tracking. Marla set down her coffee with a thud. Undercover? You mean like a cop? Something like that. Jake's been pretending to be a member of a motorcycle club, Sandra added quietly. Gathering evidence. And the man who hit me is part of the criminal organization he's investigating. Marla sat back in her chair, processing this. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. Then she laughed, a short, sharp bark of disbelief. You're joking. I wish I was, Jake said. So let me get this straight. Marla leaned forward, her eyes sharp. You've been lying to your mother for 3 months, pretending to fix motorcycles, when really you've been hanging around with criminals. And now those criminals know who your mother is because one of them assaulted her in a cafe? That's about the size of it. Marla turned to Sandra. And you're okay with this? Sandra hesitated. I wasn't. When he first told me, I was furious. Terrified. But Jake says he's close to finishing this case. That if he can just get through the next few days, she trailed off, looking at her son. It'll be over. Right? Jake's jaw tightened. That's the plan. Plans change, Marla said sharply. Especially when criminals are involved. Jake, does your handler know about this? Jake blinked, surprised. How do you know about handlers? I watch television. I'm old, not stupid. Marla crossed her arms. Does he? She. Agent Torres. And yes, she knows. She's the one who told me to bring Mom here. Why here? If this town is where these criminals operate. It's bigger than Greyport. More places to blend in. And I need to be close to. Jake stopped himself. I need to be nearby. In case something happens. Marla studied him for a long moment. Then she sighed and pushed herself up from the table. Well, you both look like you haven't eaten since yesterday. I'm making breakfast. Eggs, bacon, toast. And Jake, you're staying. Aunt Marla, I really should. You should eat. Marla pulled a frying pan from the cupboard with a clang. When's the last time you had a real meal? Not gas station coffee and protein bars, but actual food? Jake opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. 2 days ago. Exactly. Marla pointed a spatula at him. You're staying for breakfast. Your criminals can wait an hour. Despite everything, Jake smiled. Yes, ma'am. As Marla busied herself at the stove, Sandra reached across the table and took her son's hand. His fingers were calloused and rough, the hands of a man who worked with them. But they were still her son's hands. Jake, she said softly. Promise me something. What? Promise me you'll be careful. That you won't take unnecessary risks. Her voice cracked. I've already lost your father. I can't lose you too. Jake squeezed her hand. I promise, Mom. I'll be careful. But even as he said the words, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, the flip phone, and glanced at the screen. A text from Torres, location confirmed. Clearwater Marina. Warehouse 7. Tonight, 10 p.m. Iron Tide and 2 other clubs confirmed. This is it. Jake deleted the message and pocketed the phone. Across the table, Sandra watched his face change, saw the shift from son to operative, from Jake to whatever name he used in his other life. What is it? She asked. Jake looked up and forced a smile. Nothing. Just checking in. But Sandra knew her son. And she knew, with a sinking certainty, that nothing about tonight was going to be nothing. The Clearwater Marina smelled like diesel fuel and rotting fish. Jake crouched behind a stack of lobster traps, binoculars pressed to his eyes, watching the warehouse district sprawl out before him. It was 3 in the afternoon, 7 hours before the pickup, and he was running reconnaissance. Warehouse 7 sat at the far end of the marina, isolated from the active fishing operations. Its corrugated metal walls were streaked with rust, and half the windows were boarded up. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, but the gate hung open, swaying slightly in the ocean breeze. Perfect for moving illegal cargo without witnesses. Jake swept the binoculars across the area, cataloging everything. 2 security cameras, both pointed at the main entrance, blind spots on the east and west sides. A loading dock in the back with a roll-up door, currently closed. 3 motorcycles parked near the fence. And voices carrying across the water. He adjusted his focus. Rick stood near the motorcycles, gesturing angrily at 2 other men. Even from 200 yards away, Jake could read the tension in his body language. One of the men, the gray-bearded road captain from last night, stood with his arms crossed, unmoved by whatever Rick was saying. The third man was new, short, stocky, with a red bandana tied around his head. Jake pulled out his phone and snapped photos, zooming in as much as the camera would allow. He caught clear shots of their faces, their patches, their bikes. Evidence for later. Then he heard Rick's voice carry across the water. "Telling you, something's off about that guy." Jake went still. The road captain shook his head. "You're paranoid, Rick." So some biker defended his mom. So what? Doesn't mean he's a cop. I didn't say cop. I said off. Rick paced, running a hand over his shaved head. The way he moved. The way he looked at me. Like he was sizing me up. Calculating. "You got embarrassed in front of a cafe full of people," the man with the bandana said, lighting a cigarette. "Now you're seeing threats everywhere." "I know what I saw, Gunner," Rick pointed at him. "And I'm telling you, we need to be careful. If that guy shows up tonight." "He won't." The road captain, Jake now knew him as someone important, someone who made decisions, stepped closer to Rick. "Because you're going to forget about him. We've got 300 grand in electronics coming through in 7 hours. 2 other clubs involved. Cash changing hands. This is the biggest move we've made in 6 months, and I'm not letting your bruised ego screw it up." Rick's jaw clenched. "My ego's fine, Hank." "Good. Then act like it, Hank." The road captain clapped Rick on the shoulder, hard enough to make him stumble slightly. "Focus on the job. Forget the biker. We clear?" Rick nodded slowly. "Yeah. Clear." But Jake could see the doubt lingering in Rick's eyes. The suspicion. The nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Jake lowered the binoculars, his heart pounding. Rick was onto him. Maybe not consciously, maybe not enough to voice it clearly, but some instinct was telling Rick that Jake didn't fit. That he was wrong somehow. And instincts like that could get Jake killed. He needed to move. Jake circled around the marina, staying low behind boats and equipment, until he reached the east side of the warehouse. The blind spot. He waited until the 3 bikers walked into the building, their voices fading, then sprinted across the open ground to the fence. He scaled it in seconds, years of training made it effortless, and dropped silently on the other side. The warehouse loomed before him, its metal walls creaking in the wind. Jake crept along the building's perimeter until he found what he was looking for, a side door, partially concealed behind a dumpster. He tested the handle. Locked, but not deadbolt. A simple pin and tumbler that took him 30 seconds to pick with the tools he carried. The door swung open with a soft groan. Inside, the warehouse was dim and cavernous. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that sliced through the boarded windows. Empty pallets were stacked against one wall. An old forklift sat abandoned in the corner, its tires flat. And in the center of the space, a clear area had been swept clean, marked with chalk lines indicating where vehicles should park. Jake moved deeper inside, his footsteps silent on the concrete floor. He could hear voices from the office area at the front, Rick and the others, discussing logistics. He stayed in the shadows, documenting everything with his phone. The layout. The exit points. The chalk marks that showed this operation was planned, professional. Then he saw it. Tucked against the far wall, covered with a tarp, the Iron Tides cargo van. The same van that would be used to transport the stolen electronics tonight. Jake approached carefully, listening for footsteps. The voices continued from the office, arguing about timing and routes. He had maybe 2 minutes. He pulled back the tarp and examined the van, a white Ford Transit with no markings. The rear doors were unlocked. Jake opened them slowly, wincing at the creak of hinges. Empty. But it wouldn't be by tonight. Jake reached into his jacket and pulled out a small magnetic GPS tracker, courtesy of Agent Torres. He crawled under the van and attached it to the frame, hidden from view. The device activated with a soft beep, then went silent. Now the task force could follow the shipment wherever it went. Jake was sliding back out from under the van when he heard the footsteps. Heavy boots on concrete. Coming closer. Check the van one more time. Make sure it's ready. Rick's voice. Jake's pulse spiked. He was trapped, the van blocked one side, the wall the other, and Rick was walking straight toward him. No time to run. No time to hide. Jake rolled under the van completely, pressing himself flat against the cold concrete, and held his breath. Rick's boots appeared in his line of sight. Black leather, scuffed at the toes. They stopped 3 feet from the van. Looks good, Rick muttered to himself. Then he kicked one of the tires, testing the pressure. Jake didn't move. Didn't breathe. His hand hovered near the knife on his belt, just in case. Rick walked around the van, checking each tire. His boots passed within inches of Jake's head. Then they stopped. Right next to the van's undercarriage. Right where Jake lay hidden. Rick crouched down. Jake's hand closed around the knife handle. And then Rick's phone rang. Yeah? Rick stood up, answering the call. No, I'm at the warehouse. Yeah, everything set. Fine. I'll see you at 10-inch. He walked away, his voice fading as he headed back to the office. Jake lay there for another 30 seconds, listening to his heartbeat thunder in his ears. Then he slid out from under the van, replaced the tarp, and moved toward the side door. He was back outside, over the fence, and hidden behind the lobster traps within 2 minutes. His hands shook as he pulled out the flip phone and texted Torres, GPS tracker placed. Warehouse confirmed. They're expecting company at 10 p.m. Multiple clubs. Rick is suspicious but contained. Ready for takedown. Torres's reply came seconds later, good work. Back up in position by 9 p.m. You stay clear. Do not engage. Understood? Jake stared at the message. Then he texted back, understood. But as he watched the warehouse from his hiding spot, watching Rick pace outside with that nagging suspicion in his eyes, Jake knew tonight was going to go sideways. He could feel it. Jake sat in his parked motorcycle outside a coffee shop 6 blocks from the marina, nursing a cold cup of coffee he'd bought an hour ago. The sun was setting, painting the sky in burnt orange and deep purple. 7:47 p.m. Just over 2 hours until the pickup. His phone buzzed. The smartphone, not the burner. Unknown number. Jake's instincts flared. He let it ring twice more, then answered. Yeah. Heavy breathing. Background noise, engines, voices, music. Then a voice he didn't recognize, rough and slurred. You the guy who messed with Rick? Jake's grip tightened on the phone. Who's asking? Doesn't matter. Just listen. You seem like someone who can handle himself, so I'm gonna do you a favor, the voice dropped lower. Leave Clearwater. Tonight. Don't come back. Things are about to get complicated, and you don't want to be around when they do. Complicated how? That's all you get. Consider it a courtesy, the line went dead. Jake stared at the phone, his mind racing. Someone from the Iron Tide had his number. But how? He'd been careful, hadn't given it to anyone. Unless. His mother. At the cafe yesterday, her phone had been in her purse. The purse Rick had grabbed. Jake swore under his breath. Rick must have scrolled through Sandra's recent calls, found Jake's number, and passed it along. Which meant they'd been checking up on him. Digging. Trying to figure out who he was. The net was tightening. Jake pulled out the burner and called Torres. She answered immediately. "Talk to me. I just got a warning call. They have my personal number." "How?" "Rick went through my mother's phone yesterday. They've been researching me." Jake started his motorcycle, the engine rumbling to life. "Torres, if they're digging, they might find something. My cover's thin. Your cover's solid. We built it to withstand scrutiny," but Torres's voice was tense. "Still, a warning call means they're uncertain. They haven't made you, or they would have moved on you already. They're trying to scare you off. It's working." Torres was quiet for a moment. "Where are you?" "6 blocks from the marina." Staying mobile, Jake checked his mirrors out of habit. "What's the status on your team?" "In position. 2 surveillance vans, 4 agents, local PD on standby. We're ready to move the moment the electronics arrive." Torres paused. "Jake, I need you to go back to your aunt's house. Stay with your mother. This operation doesn't need you on site." "Torres. That's an order." Jake was about to respond when he saw them. 3 motorcycles rolled past the coffee shop, heading away from the marina. Iron-tied vests. And riding in front, Rick. They weren't heading toward Warehouse 7. They were heading inland. "Torres, hold on." Jake pulled out his phone and snapped photos of the bikes as they passed. He zoomed in on their license plates, then brought the burner back to his ear. 3 Iron-Tide members just passed my position, heading northeast. Away from the marina. That doesn't make sense. The pickup is at the marina in 2 hours. Maybe it's a security run. Checking routes, but even as Jake said it, doubt crept in. Something felt wrong. His smartphone buzzed. A text from the unknown number. "Smart people listen to warnings. Stupid people end up dead." And then, 30 seconds later, another text. This one from a different number, but the area code was local. "Warehouse 7 is a decoy. Pickup moved. You didn't hear it from me." Jake's blood ran cold. He forwarded the text to Torres immediately, then called her back. "We've got a problem." "I see it." "Who sent this?" "No idea. But if it's legitimate, then we've been chasing the wrong location all day." Torres was already typing, her voice sharp and fast. "Hold on. I'm pulling up surveillance from the wiretaps. If they changed the location, there should be chatter." Jake watched the 3 motorcycles disappear around a corner. His gut screamed at him to follow, but Torres had ordered him to stand down. "Torres? Damn it," the typing stopped. "You're right. There was a call 40 minutes ago from Hank, the road captain, to someone in Ridgeview. He said, move it to the backup spot. Same time, I thought it was about a secondary vehicle, but it was about the whole operation." Jake kicked his motorcycle into gear. "Where's Ridgeview?" 40 minutes inland. Industrial area. We've got no surveillance there, no backup in position." Torres swore again. How the hell did they know to move it? Jake's mind raced through possibilities. A leak? Someone spotted the surveillance vans? Or maybe Rick's paranoia had infected the whole crew, making them change plans out of an abundance of caution. "Doesn't matter how," Jake said. "What matters is the task force is in the wrong location. We can relocate, but it'll take time. 45 minutes minimum to get units to Ridgeview, and that's if we move now." Torres's frustration bled through the phone. "Jake, I need eyes on this. I need confirmation that they actually moved the pickup before I pull resources from the marina. You want me to follow them? I want you to confirm." Just confirm. Get a visual on the new location, verify the electronics are there, then get out. My team will handle the takedown. Jake hesitated. Following 3 Iron Tide members into an unfamiliar town, alone, with his cover already compromised, it was a recipe for disaster. But if Torres pulled her team from the marina and the anonymous tip was wrong, they'd lose the whole operation. Jake? I'll do it, he said. But I need something from you first. Name it. If this goes bad, if they make me, you get my mother out of Clearwater immediately. Protective custody. New identity if necessary. Whatever it takes. Torres didn't hesitate. Done. I'll have an agent at your aunt's house within 20 minutes. Your mother will be safe. Jake nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Send me the address for the industrial area in Ridgeview. Any known warehouses, vacant buildings, places they might use. Sending now. A pause. And Jake? Be smart. Confirm and retreat. Do not engage. Understood. Jake ended the call and pulled up the map Torres had sent. Ridgeview's industrial district was a maze of abandoned factories and storage facilities, a perfect place for an illegal pickup. Dozens of potential locations, any one of which could be the real target. He revved his engine and pulled onto the road, heading northeast. The 3 motorcycles were long gone, but Jake had something they didn't know about. The GPS tracker he'd planted on their van. He pulled up the tracking app on his smartphone. The van was moving, heading in the same direction as the bikes. Away from Clearwater. Toward Ridgeview. Jake accelerated, weaving through evening traffic. Behind him, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, and darkness settled over the coast. Somewhere ahead, in a town he didn't know, surrounded by criminals who suspected he wasn't what he seemed, Jake was about to walk into the most dangerous night of his life. And the only thing keeping him moving forward was the promise he'd made to his mother that morning. I'll be careful. He just hoped it was a promise he could keep. Marla's kitchen smelled like chamomile tea and lemon cookies. Sandra sat at the table, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite the warm evening, staring at her phone. Jake had texted her an hour ago, staying out late. Work stuff. Don't wait up. Work stuff. As if tracking criminals was the same as fixing a carburetor. You need to eat something, Marla said, setting a plate of cookies in front of her. You've barely touched your dinner. Sandra picked up a cookie but didn't bite into it. I can't stop thinking about him out there. Alone. Jake knows what he's doing. Does he? Sandra looked at her sister. He's pretending to be someone he's not, surrounded by dangerous people. One mistake, one wrong word, and her voice broke. Marla sat down across from her and took her hand. Jake is smart. And strong. He's going to be fine. You don't know that. No, Marla admitted. But worrying yourself sick won't help him. All we can do is wait. Sandra hated waiting. She'd waited when Jake was deployed overseas with the army. Waited through sleepless nights, imagining the worst. And now, years later, she was waiting again. Only this time, the enemy wasn't an ocean away. It was right here, in coastal towns she'd driven through without a second thought. A car door slammed outside. Both women looked up. Are you expecting someone? Sandra asked. Marla shook her head. No. Maybe it's the neighbors. Then came the knock on the front door. 3 sharp raps. Marla stood and walked to the living room, Sandra following close behind. Through the window beside the door, they could see 2 figures on the porch. Men. Large. Wearing leather vests. Sandra's breath caught. Don't answer it. Maybe they're just lost. Marla, don't. Sandra grabbed her sister's arm. Those are Iron Tide vests. The same gang that. Another knock, harder this time. Mrs. Fletcher, a voice called through the door. Deep, gravelly. Sorry to bother you. We're just looking for directions. Our GPS isn't working. Marla glanced at Sandra, uncertainty flickering across her face. Sandra shook her head urgently and pulled out her phone. She texted Jake, 2 Iron Tide members at Marla's house. What do we do? The 3 dots appeared immediately, then, don't open the door. Stay calm. Act normal if they see you through windows. I'm calling for help. Mrs. Fletcher? The voice came again. We saw the lights on. Just need a quick favor. Marla took a breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped closer to the door, but didn't open it. I'm sorry, but it's late. I don't open my door to strangers after dark. A pause. Then a different voice, younger, come on, lady. We're not gonna hurt you. Just need directions to the marina. There's a gas station 2 blocks down. They can help you. Marla's voice was steady, firm. Through the window, Sandra watched the 2 men exchange glances. One of them, tall and broad with a gray beard, leaned closer to the door. This is 447 Maple Street, right? Marla Fletcher's place? Sandra's stomach dropped. They knew Marla's name. Her address. Who are you? Marla asked, her voice wavering slightly now. Just some friends passing through. We heard your nephew might be staying here. Jake Miller? Rides a black Harley? Sandra pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. They were looking for Jake. They'd connected him to Marla somehow, maybe followed Sandra's car yesterday, maybe checked registration records, maybe Rick had put more pieces together than anyone realized. My nephew left this morning, Marla said, recovering her composure. He was just visiting his mother. Dropped her off and headed back to Delaware. Haven't seen him since. Another pause. The 2 men were conferring quietly, their voices too low to hear clearly. Sandra's phone buzzed. Jake, keep them talking. Help is 10 minutes away. 10 minutes. An eternity. Delaware, huh? The gray-bearded one spoke again. What's he do there? He's a mechanic. Works at a shop in Wilmington. Marla was improvising now, using the cover story Jake had maintained for months. Why are you looking for him? No reason. Just wanted to thank him for being so reasonable yesterday. After that thing with Rick at the cafe. A pause. Rick feels bad about the misunderstanding. Wanted to apologize. Lies. Every word dripping with them. Marla seemed to sense it too. Well, like I said, Jake's already gone. But I'll let him know if he calls. You do that. The gray-bearded one stepped back from the door. Sorry to bother you, ma'am. You have a good night. Sandra heard their footsteps retreat down the porch steps. She moved to the window and peeked through the curtain, careful not to be seen. The 2 men walked to their motorcycles, parked right in front of the house, bold as brass. But they didn't leave. Instead, they sat on their bikes, engines off, talking. One of them pulled out a phone and made a call. They were watching the house. Marla, turn off the lights, Sandra whispered. Make it look like we're going to bed. Marla nodded and moved through the house, switching off lamps one by one. They ended up in the kitchen, sitting in darkness, watching the street through a gap in the curtains. The 2 bikers stayed for 7 minutes. Then a 3rd motorcycle arrived, a rider in an Iron Tide vest with a red bandana. The 3 men talked, gesturing toward the house. The new arrival seemed angry, his body language aggressive. Finally, the gray-bearded one made a calming gesture, and all 3 mounted their bikes. The engines roared to life, shattering the quiet suburban night. And then they were gone, disappearing down Maple Street. Sandra exhaled slowly, her entire body shaking. Marla turned to her in the darkness. "Sandy, what's really going on? Why are they so interested in Jake?" "Because he's getting too close," Sandra whispered. "And they're trying to figure out if he's a threat." Her phone buzzed. "Jake, are they gone?" Sandra, "Yes. Just left." "What now?" "Jake, stay inside. Lock everything. Agent Torres is sending someone to watch the house." "And Mom?" Sandra, "Yes. Jake, I'm sorry. This is my fault." Sandra stared at the message, tears stinging her eyes. Then she typed back, "Just finish this. End it tonight. I can't take another day of this. Jake, I will. I promise. I love you. Sandra, I love you too. Be safe." She set the phone down on the kitchen table and buried her face in her hands. Across from her, Marla pulled her chair closer and wrapped an arm around her sister's shoulders. "He's going to be okay," Marla whispered. But neither of them believed it. Outside, a car pulled up to the curb, an unmarked sedan. A woman in plain clothes stepped out, surveying the street. She caught Sandra's eye through the window and nodded once. Agent Torres's protection detail had arrived. But Sandra knew that no amount of protection could help Jake now. He was alone in Ridgeview, walking into a trap, and there was nothing she could do but wait. Again. Jake killed his motorcycle's engine 2 blocks from the warehouse district and coasted to a stop behind an abandoned auto parts store. The GPS tracker showed the Iron Tides van parked inside a large building at the center of the industrial area, an old textile factory, according to the map Torres had sent. The clock on his phone read 9:47 p.m. 13 minutes until the pickup. He couldn't wait for backup. Jake pulled out the burner and texted Torres, "Found the location. Old Richfield Textile Factory, 1847 Industrial Drive. Van is inside. Multiple motorcycles outside. At least 8 to 10 hostiles. Torres, do not enter. Backup is 15 minutes out. I repeat, do not engage." Jake stared at the message. 15 minutes. In 15 minutes, the electronics would change hands, money would be exchanged, and the smugglers would scatter like cockroaches when the lights came on. They'd never get this chance again. He pocketed the phone without responding. Moving low and fast, Jake crossed the street and approached the factory through an overgrown lot filled with rusted machinery and broken pallets. The building loomed before him, 3 stories of brick and broken windows, its loading docks illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. Motorcycles lined the parking area. Jake counted 12. 3 different clubs represented, Iron Tide, the Devil's Brotherhood, and one he didn't recognize, a patch showing a coiled serpent. This was bigger than Torres had anticipated. Jake circled to the building's east side, where a fire escape hung from the 3rd floor. The ladder was pulled up, but a dumpster sat beneath it. He climbed onto the dumpster, jumped, and caught the bottom rung. The metal groaned under his weight but held. Within seconds, he was climbing. The 3rd floor was abandoned, empty except for old sewing machines covered in dust and pigeon droppings. Jake moved through the darkness to a window overlooking the ground floor. He crouched behind a support beam and looked down. The ground floor had been cleared into one massive open space. The white van sat in the center, its rear doors open. And surrounding it were men, 15, maybe 20, all wearing leather vests, all armed. Rick stood near the van, talking to Hank, the gray-bearded road captain. Beside them was a man Jake didn't recognize, late 50s, expensive leather jacket, no club patches. He carried a silver briefcase. The buyer. Jake pulled out his phone and started recording video, zooming in on faces, patches, the license plates of vehicles. Every piece of evidence Torres would need for warrants and prosecutions. Told you the marina was compromised, Hank was saying, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Someone's been watching us. Had to switch locations. You sure it's not internal? The buyer asked, his voice smooth, educated. I don't like surprises. It's not internal. Just careful police work. Hank gestured to the van. But we're clean here. No tail, no surveillance. Your merchandise is secure. The buyer nodded and set the briefcase on the van's bumper. He popped it open, revealing stacks of cash. 300,000, as agreed. 50 laptops, 30 tablets, 20 high-end cameras. All untraceable. Rick moved to the van and started pulling out boxes, displaying the electronics for inspection. The buyer examined several items, checking serial numbers against a list on his phone. Jake recorded everything, his hands steady despite his racing heart. This was it, the entire operation on video. The merchandise, the money, the faces. Torres would have everything she needed. Then Jake's phone vibrated. Not the burner. His personal phone. The sound was barely audible, a soft buzz against his jacket, but in the silence of the third floor, it might as well have been a gunshot. Every head below turned upward. What was that? Rick's hand went to his belt, where Jake could see the grip of a pistol. Probably rats, someone said. But Rick wasn't convinced. His eyes scanned the upper floors, searching the shadows. Check it out. Now. 3 men broke away from the group and headed for the stairs. Jake swore silently and moved. He had maybe 30 seconds before they reached the 3rd floor. His mind calculated options: hide and hope they didn't find him, or create a diversion and slip out during the confusion. Neither option was good. He crawled along the floor toward the fire escape window he'd entered through. Behind him, he heard boots pounding up the stairs. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. See anything? Not yet. Keep looking. Jake reached the window and eased it open, wincing at the creak of old wood. The fire escape was 10 feet away, a dangerous jump, but possible. There. By the window. Jake didn't hesitate. He dove through the window as a gunshot cracked through the air. The bullet sparked off the metal frame inches from his head. He hit the fire escape hard, rolled, and started descending. More gunshots. The metal stairs rang like bells as bullets ricocheted around him. Jake jumped the last 8 feet to the ground and sprinted toward his motorcycle. Behind him, the warehouse erupted in chaos. Men shouting. Engines starting. The entire operation dissolving into panic. He reached his bike, kick-started it, and tore out of the industrial district as headlights flooded the darkness behind him. 3 motorcycles gave chase, their riders leaning low over their handlebars. Jake opened the throttle, the engine screaming as he hit 60, 70, 80 miles per hour on the empty industrial roads. The pursuing bike stayed with him, closing the distance. He needed backup. Now. Jake pulled out the burner one-handed and hit speed dial. Torres answered immediately over the roar of the engine. Jake, where are you? Blown. 3 hostiles pursuing southbound on Industrial Drive. A bullet whined past his helmet. They're shooting. Hold on. Units are converging on your position. Jake took a hard right, his knee nearly scraping asphalt. The 3 bikes followed. Another gunshot, this one closer, punching through his saddlebag. Then, ahead in the darkness, red and blue lights blazed to life. Police cruisers blocked the intersection, officers taking position behind open doors. Federal agents. Stop your vehicles. The 3 pursuing motorcycles tried to brake, but they were going too fast. 2 of them laid their bikes down, skidding across the asphalt in showers of sparks. The 3rd tried to turn but crashed into a street sign. Jake slowed his bike and circled back, breathing hard. Torres's voice crackled through the phone. Jake? You okay? Yeah. I'm good. He watched officers swarm the 3 downed bikers, weapons drawn. But Torres? The warehouse. Already on it. SWAT's moving in now. In the distance, Jake heard the percussion of flashbangs, the shouts of federal agents storming the Richfield factory. It was over. The Richfield textile factory was lit up like a stadium, surrounded by police cruisers, unmarked federal vehicles, and an ambulance. Jake sat on the curb across the street, a paramedic shining a light in his eyes while Agent Torres paced nearby, barking orders into her phone. I'm fine, Jake said for the 3rd time, pushing the penlight away. Just some scrapes. You were shot at, the paramedic said flatly. That's not fine. I've been shot at before. The paramedic gave him a look that said he was an idiot, then moved to check on the 3 bikers Jake had led straight into police custody. All 3 were cuffed, sitting on the ground with officers standing over them. One kept glaring at Jake with pure hatred in his eyes. Torres ended her call and crouched beside Jake. SWAT secured the warehouse. 15 arrests, including your friend Rick. Recovered all the stolen electronics, $300,000 in cash, and enough weapons charges to keep prosecutors busy for months. She studied his face. You disobeyed a direct order. I got you the evidence. You nearly got yourself killed. Nearly doesn't count. Jake met her eyes. Did they get the buyer? Torres's expression darkened. No. He rabbit when you were spotted. Probably had an exit strategy planned. We've got units searching, but he's gone. Jake cursed under his breath. The buyer was the key to the whole operation, the person who moved stolen goods overseas, who had the connections and infrastructure to make the smuggling profitable. Without him, they'd cut off one head of the Hydra, but the body would survive. We'll find him, Torres said, reading his frustration. We've got his face on your video, prints from the briefcase, phone records from the wiretaps. He's not invisible. But he's careful. So are we. Torres stood and offered Jake her hand. Come on. There's someone who wants to see you. Jake let her pull him to his feet. His ribs ached where he'd hit the fire escape, and his hands were scraped raw from climbing. But he was alive. That was more than he'd expected an hour ago. Torres led him across the street to the warehouse entrance, where SWAT was leading out a line of cuffed prisoners. Jake recognized most of them from his surveillance earlier, members of the Iron Tide, the Devil's Brotherhood, the club with the serpent patch. And in the middle of the line, his face bruised and his vest torn, was Rick. Jake stopped walking. Rick saw him at the same moment. His eyes widened, then narrowed with recognition. You. Jake said nothing. You're the biker from the cafe. Rick tried to lunge forward, but the officer holding him yanked him back. I knew something was wrong with you. I knew it. Torres stepped forward, her badge displayed prominently. Rick Callahan, I'm Special Agent Maria Torres with the ATF. You're under arrest for trafficking in stolen goods, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and about 15 other charges I'll read you later. Rick ignored her, his eyes locked on Jake. Who are you? What are you? Jake stepped closer, his expression calm. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his own badge, the one he'd kept hidden for 3 months. Detective Jake Miller. Multi-State Smuggling Task Force. He let that sink in. I've been watching you for 12 weeks, Rick. Documenting your movements, your contacts, your operations. Every shipment, every deal, every illegal act. All on record. Rick's face went white. You're a cop. Undercover operative. Jake pocketed his badge. And you made it personal when you put your hands on my mother. Rick's mouth opened and closed like a fish. That old lady was really my mother. Yes, Jake's voice went cold. You assaulted a 68-year-old widow because she wouldn't let you steal her purse. And then you sent your buddies to threaten her at her sister's house. That wasn't smart, Rick. Rick seemed to deflate, the anger draining out of him. He looked around at the police, the federal agents, the evidence being loaded into trucks. This whole time. You were setting us up. I was doing my job. Your job? Rick laughed bitterly. Your job was lying. Pretending to be one of us. You're a snake, Miller. A rat. I'm the reason you're going to prison for the next 20 years, Jake leaned closer. And every day you're in there, I want you to remember something. You had a choice. You could have walked away from my mother at that cafe. Could have been the bigger man. But you hit her. You escalated. You made this personal, he straightened. So everything that happens to you now? That's on you. Rick tried to respond, but the officer pulled him away, loading him into a transport van with the others. Torres watched them go, then turned to Jake. Feel better? Not really, Jake rubbed his face. The buyer got away. The operation's compromised. And Rick was just middle management. The people really running this will be harder to find now, yes, Torres crossed her arms. But we'll find them. This was a major victory, Jake. Don't discount that. Jake knew she was right. 15 arrests. Hundreds of thousands in recovered goods and cash. Enough evidence to dismantle at least 3 motorcycle clubs involved in smuggling. It was a good night's work. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. What happens now? Jake asked. Now you write reports. Lots of them, Torres smiled slightly. And then you take some time off. Mandatory. You've been deep cover for 3 months. You need to decompress, remember who you are when you're not pretending to be someone else. Jake thought about that. 3 months of lying, of watching his words, of maintaining a character that wasn't him. 3 months of hanging around criminals, learning their codes, their habits, their secrets. It had taken a toll he hadn't fully acknowledged until now. How long? 2 weeks minimum. More if you need it, Torres's expression softened. Go see your mother, Jake. She's been worried sick. As if summoned by the words, Jake's phone buzzed. A text from Sandra, agent at the house says it's over. Are you okay? Jake typed back with scratched fingers, I'm okay. Heading to you now. It's finished, Mom. It's really finished. He sent the message and looked back at the warehouse one last time. Officers were still processing the scene, documenting everything for trial. The Iron Tides van was being loaded onto a flatbed truck. Evidence bags were being catalogued and sealed. Somewhere in that chaos was the culmination of 3 months of work. And standing here, watching it all, Jake felt nothing but exhaustion. Go, Torres said quietly. I'll handle the rest tonight. We'll debrief tomorrow. Jake nodded and walked to his motorcycle. The engine started with a familiar rumble, and he pulled out of the industrial district, leaving the lights and chaos behind. The ride to Marla's house took 20 minutes. The streets were quiet, the town asleep. Jake's mind drifted as he rode, thinking about everything that had happened since yesterday afternoon. A simple cafe. A simple lunch. And then violence, secrets revealed, danger at every turn. But it was over now. Rick was in custody. The smuggling ring was broken. And his mother was safe. Jake could finally breathe. The morning sun rose over Clearwater Beach in brilliant shades of gold and pink, casting long shadows across the sand. Sandra stood at the water's edge, her shoes in one hand, letting the cold Atlantic wash over her feet. Behind her, Marla's beach house sat quiet and peaceful, smoke curling from the chimney where her sister was making breakfast. But Sandra needed air. Space. A moment to process everything that had happened in the past 48 hours. She heard footsteps in the sand and turned. Jake walked toward her, looking more tired than she'd ever seen him. He'd showered and changed into clean clothes, jeans and a simple gray t-shirt, but the exhaustion was etched into every line of his face. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. A bruise colored his jaw. "You're up early," he said, stopping beside her. "Couldn't sleep." Sandra turned back to the ocean. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those men at Marla's door. Heard their voices. I'm sorry, Mom." "Stop apologizing." Sandra's voice was soft but firm. "You did what you had to do. What you've been trained to do." She paused. I never realized how dangerous your work really is. All those Sunday calls, you talking about fixing motorcycles and carburetor problems." Her voice cracked. "It was all lies." "Not all of it." Jake picked up a piece of driftwood and tossed it into the waves. "The person I am when I call you, that's real. That's who I am. The undercover work, the pretending. That's just a job. A job that nearly got you killed. But it didn't." Sandra turned to face him, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Jake, I buried your father 5 years ago. I stood at his grave and promised myself I'd never have to do that again. That I'd never have to identify a body, plan a funeral, sit in an empty house wondering why I was left behind." She grabbed his arms, her fingers digging in. "Don't make me break that promise. Don't make me lose you too." Jake pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as she cried against his chest. "You won't lose me, Mom. I promise." "You can't promise that." "I can promise to be careful. To be smart." He pulled back, looking into her eyes. "And I can promise that I'm taking a break. Torres gave me mandatory leave. 2 weeks to start, maybe longer." Sandra wiped her eyes. 2 weeks isn't enough. Not after 3 months of that. "It's a start." Jake smiled slightly. "And I was thinking. You're supposed to be on a coastal drive, visiting Marla. Maybe I could join you for part of it. Actually do the tourist thing. Visit lighthouses, eat overpriced seafood, buy terrible souvenirs." Despite everything, Sandra laughed. "You hate tourist things." "I hate undercover work more right now." Jake's smile faded. "I need normal, Mom. I need to remember what it feels like to just be your son for a while. Not an operative. Not a detective. Just me." Sandra studied his face, her son, her boy, who'd grown into a man she sometimes barely recognized. A man who carried badges and guns and secrets she'd never fully understand. But underneath all of that, he was still Jake. Still the kid who'd held her hand at his father's funeral. Still the teenager who'd called her every week during his army deployment. Still her son. "Okay," she said softly. "You can join me. But on one condition." "What's that?" "No phones. No work. No, just checking in with Agent Torres." Sandra pointed at him. 2 weeks of being completely, totally off duty. Can you do that?" Jake hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. I can do that." They stood together in silence, watching the waves roll in. A seagull cried overhead. Somewhere down the beach, a dog barked and children laughed. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. "What happens to Rick?" Sandra asked after a while. "Prison. 20 years minimum, probably more." Jake's voice was flat, matter of fact. "He'll be processed, arraigned, and held without bail. The evidence against him is overwhelming. He's done." "Good." Sandra surprised herself with the vehemence in her voice. "I know I'm supposed to be forgiving. Christian. But that man hit me, Jake. He scared me in ways I haven't been scared since your father died. So if he spends the next 20 years in a cell thinking about his choices? Good. Jake looked at her with something like pride. When did you get so fierce? I've always been fierce. You just never noticed because I was too busy making you dinner and doing your laundry, Sandra smiled. Now come on. Marla's making pancakes, and you look like you haven't eaten a real meal in days. They walked back across the sand together, mother and son, their footprints trailing behind them. The ocean continued its endless rhythm, washing everything clean. Inside the beach house, Marla had set the table with her good dishes, the ones with the little blue flowers. Pancakes were stacked high on a platter. Bacon sizzled in a pan. Coffee steamed in ceramic mugs. There you are, Marla said, flipping a pancake. I was about to send a search party. Just needed some air, Sandra said, sliding into a chair. Jake sat beside her, reaching for the coffee like it was a lifeline. They ate together, talking about nothing important. The weather. Marla's garden. A movie Sandra wanted to see. Small talk, but it felt precious after everything they'd been through. When breakfast was finished and the dishes were washed, Jake pulled out his phones, all three of them, and powered them down. He set them on the counter in a neat row. 2 weeks, he said, looking at Sandra. 2 weeks, she agreed. That afternoon, they loaded Sandra's Honda with fresh clothes and snacks and a cooler full of Marla's homemade lemonade. Jake strapped his duffel to his motorcycle. They said goodbye to Marla with promises to call from the road. And then they drove north along the coast, mother and son, leaving Clearwater and its nightmares behind. They stopped at lighthouses and small-town diners. They walked on beaches where the only footprints were theirs. They watched sunsets that painted the sky in impossible colors. They talked about Sandra's late husband, Jake's father, and the good memories, the ones that didn't hurt quite so much anymore. And slowly, over those 2 weeks, Jake stopped looking over his shoulder. Stopped calculating exits and threats. Stopped being an operative. He just became her son again. On the last day, they sat on a beach in Maine, watching waves crash against rocky cliffs. The air smelled like salt and pine. The sun was warm on their faces. Thank you, Jake said quietly. For what? For not giving up on me. For still loving me even after everything I put you through. He picked up a smooth stone and turned it over in his hands. I know the last few days were hell. They were, Sandra admitted. But we survived them. Together, she took his hand. That's what family does, Jake. We survive. We adapt. We forgive. And we move forward. Jake nodded, squeezing her hand. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. They sat there until the sun began to set, painting the ocean in shades of fire. And when they finally stood to leave, brushing sand from their clothes, Sandra felt something she hadn't felt in days. Peace. The nightmare was over. Rick was behind bars. The smuggling ring was broken. And her son was safe, standing beside her, whole and alive. Whatever came next, whatever cases or undercover operations or dangers lurked in the future, they'd face them when they arrived. But today, on this beach, with the ocean stretching endlessly before them, they were just Sandra and Jake. Mother and son. And that was enough. The end.